Well, Gedal Jesus Minlam Mahan Hainis Sam Van Kele Savin San and Arat Tolly Viota Habicat August Nadinia Toy Chasterlam Toma Buyak Diavas and Firkin Foja Darishiv Ruin August in Orira Quinche is Okkait Kalura Kanihe Shah Tris Liam Le Shahail Shi asacht an cosata agrahacha dan shachten is mo weakest lob as gakra the viagra doing. May I just say what a great pleasure it is to be here again, and I just so want to thank our two ambassadors, Patricia O'Brien and Francis Collins, their excellencies, for putting together this colluder na herinig scaper harfoot na hidola. I'm so pleased that they were able to put together this community of Irish people in Italy, drawn, as I looked at the list, from so many different cities and in different circumstances of relationship with Italy. I was here for an Araolas meeting with other non-executive presidents, just a short term, right in the middle of COVID, and on that occasion it was difficult we had all to manage different circumstances. I do want to take the opportunity again of saying to all of you who were abroad during the COVID period, it was very difficult if you were losing people at home to be unable to make contact. It was, of course, particularly awful for those who had losses during that period. And as president, I remember more than once it being brought to my attention what people had to experience. Of course, the figures too tell us Italy suffered so much during COVID. I have to say too that this visit has had a very warm beginning. Apart from having the privilege and opportunity of speaking about global hunger, I had spoken about the importance of hunger, of food security in Dakar last January, and I had my mind made up that I would continue this conversation in Rome. And I think Rome is very lucky to have located in it the major institutions that are addressing food issues. One could reel off all the millions of people in different parts of the world who are in fact suffering from hunger, but what's important to remember, they are all conscious human beings, each one of them, who should not in fact be suffering in that way. I regard it, frankly, as one of the great failures that we have not succeeded in addressing these issues of global hunger, poverty, and of course they are so closely related to issues of migration, which in turn is affected desperately by the consequences of climate change. I keep repeating it. As I said, I was speaking in Africa last January and will be again on these issues. The emissions for which Africa as a full continent is responsible is 4%. And yet they look at people who are dying, their animals dying, the way of agriculture, the way of life destroyed. And it is very, very important for us to accept our responsibilities. Here gathering here this evening, we're of course very, very fortunate to have the opportunity of meeting in a building that has such historic connections and that has been so important to Ireland, from where all of different initiatives have flowed from this building. I think that it has, of course, a significance for Italy and for those who are interested in Garibaldi. But it is, of course, interesting, particularly as well, I think, for all of the different initiatives from the Irish Embassy over the last 77 years. I do so want to thank, as I have already, Ambassadors O'Brien and Collins for their hospitality this evening and on behalf of you all. I do want to say that people come putting groups together like this, We will, Sabina and I, will be delighted to meet as many people as we can. I have to say that for me this meeting was something special as well, this gathering we have. It's a collaboration between, yes, the two ambassadors and the Department of Foreign Affairs, with a very valuable connection with the Department of Agriculture, to the events that I have been describing at FAO and at the Food and Agriculture Organization and IFAD and the World Food Programme. I think there has been brilliant, insightful cooperation by the Department of Agriculture, and it is so much appropriate that the Minister who is accompanying us here is Philippa Hackett, who is the Minister for State of the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, with responsibility for land use and biodiversity. And I think that that is so important. And I'm sure she met as we came in, which is one of the significant things of this week. The young people that whom the Department of Agriculture have funded so as to be an offended, who will in fact represent the very best possibilities we have for the necessary transformations in food systems. And drawn, as I think as well, not just from Ireland and the head of Macron Affairs here, but also drawn from countries where Ireland is engaged in Africa. I do think the meetings. I had a meeting this morning with President Mattarella, a very warm meeting, between just the two of us, followed by a meeting between our officials and the delegations, and then again for lunch. And I think when I say it is a very, very warm meeting, both of us were very involved in the meetings in relation to international food issues. And I think there was something else too. There's the many ways in which Ireland and Italy share interests. What I think was striking in the Cardinal in there is our interest, for example, in things of the spirit and of beauty. I think there is so much. I'm grateful to all of the people who provide opportunities for the celebration of Irish culture. This evening, I think somewhere here, is the translator of James Joyce, Enrico Taranoni, and isn't it wonderful, who is in fact a graduate of University College Dublin and who has made an immense contribution to the connection between Irish scholarship between our countries. But then too also in many cases, as I discussed with the President Mattarella, the long interest, Italy is the location from the time of, people say about the founding of Europe, and I say that the best expression of the future of Europe is in the Ventotene Accords. Those men in jail in an island and so forth who wrote and said, we must never again have war, we must create a Europe that will be a beacon of peace to the whole world. These are strong, strong messages and that. And I think that the contribution of Italy and into the heritage of what is our shared space of Europe is extraordinary. To all of you who are working in different ways, I think that at the business sector, I know many of them in Italy here, they are respected because they are people who can be trusted. I think more than as well as anything, the artists who are here, who performed here, they have always seen it as a great opportunity to perform for Irish audiences. I think what is very, very, very much, it's interesting that sometimes when people say phrases like the future of Europe, it's as if it is a technocratic expression. It's much more important than that. It is how, in fact, we will deliver our humanity in a shared space and in a way that will be able, with dignity, to share with the rest of the world. I do think as well that, as I saw on the list, there are two embassies involved here, and I think that for our friends who are here, the invitation of our representation at the Vatican. This will be, I think, my fourth meeting with Pope Francis on Thursday when I meet him. I've already congratulated him on his most recent statement, Laudate Deum. And the message, I hope, was not lost on the leaders of the world, where, if you like, 8 years on from Laudato Si, all of the commitments having been made to make our world one in which people could have the dignity, security of being free from hunger, and in fact be able to look at each other and treat each other with a mutual respect for dignity. He is in fact actually reprimanding the world for bad faith. And I think in May it is fascinating to see the close connection between what he is saying and what in fact the Secretary General of the United Nations is saying. I will be talking to him as well about the immense significance of his statement on discovery. And I want to think as well, it would be very, very foolish if people thought that in the different changes that are taking place in the world, that periods of that efforts at transcendence and periods of reflection and recognizing the different approaches towards establishing dignity are ever more important now. We began our visit to Rome on World Food Day. And I think that was a very, very important event. We spoke, for example, the emphasis on the importance of water. Water that is in fact so much part of our body, water that connects us in the oceans, and waters that we have treated so badly in an economic system that has poisoned so many rivers and that has in fact deprived livelihoods of so many people in parts of the world. I spoke with President Majorelle and others at the opening of the World Food Programme, and I will be speaking again in response very much to young people's view on all of these issues on Friday. It is a very, very, therefore I say all of this to say that for us, Sabine and those travelling with me, it's a great pleasure to be here in this building. And it is even so much all the better, made more so by the fact that their excellencies have been able to assemble all of you who have been representing Ireland in your different ways, however you do it, and so forth. And being Ireland, it is one of the great things, no more than about Italy and Ireland, is another thing that we have in common, is that to say you are, perhaps have identified with Ireland, have travelled to Ireland, made Ireland your home, been Irish over many generations, is that you haven't established excluding categories. That the world is in fact the world that we share, and that it is a world that has the capacity to be improved. I think that it will be so. It is just so important, and I think in many ways. It was here in June 1849 that Garibaldi made his last stand against the French. I think in its way as well, after all, the Quernala where I was today as well was once, I think, where the Pope slept. So the world changes. But I think in many ways in changes it is important always to be conscious of the settings in where we are. I have to say, as I finish, it isn't, I said about how you've represented it in Ireland in your multitude of different ways. I think, for example, too, in the different cities of Italy where the Gaelic Athletic Association is organising, and I pay tribute to them and all of their successes. I often say to myself, you must always put in a sting in somewhere about it. I did mention, and Enrico is here, my friend, who has translated my own work as well, is that Enrico would not deny that Rome was not necessarily good to James Joyce. Having got his meagre pittance from his remuneration, he didn't quite make it home safe to Trieste. But for all that we do, and in the end of it all, when you think about it, the life that is a life, we must, I think, in everything we're doing this week, establish a baseline of meeting the necessities of life in all its different places on our planet. And even beyond that, all of that, to respect the imagination and the spirit that has given Italy such wonderful, wonderful expressions in all of the arts. And the way that Irish people, for example, moving into exile, were able to move into that. And how in the contemporary world, with travel made so much, much easier. There are young people, women and men of all ages and different circumstances, sharing with the Italians and their generation the importance of public culture in the public space, the performed world, be it in theatre and writing and so on. And I have to say, again, to my dear friend Enrico and so forth, I thank him for the extraordinary way in which, for example, he has shown how an Italian person coming, studying and knowing Irish literature, but able brought our greatest writer to the world. It is he who has done that, and so have others in relation to others of our writers. So this is an evening then, so let us celebrate the connections that bind and join us all, and let us make a resolve that we will turn all of the words, the best of the words that we will use this week on solving global poverty and hunger and migration, that we will turn them into actions that will reflect the moral sense of our authenticity. Mille buicas, es per banner.